ready to roll here. So my name is John Prydish, and I'm here today to continue our series on education around supply chain with our clients and prospective clients alike. And I've got Hugo joining me here, Hugo Fuentes. Hugo, would you like to introduce yourself?
For sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you first of all, John, for the invite. Yeah, so a little bit introduction about myself, and maybe moving to the next slide. So I've been in supply chain for 20 years. That's my area of expertise. I've had fortunate to work in different companies in different geographies in Canada, Mexico, Netherlands, and Chile, and different industries: global transportation, consumer packaged goods manufacturing, and then heavy equipment and spare parts distribution. Over the last 5 years, also I've done some supply chain advisor work, particularly around sales and operations planning, helping companies to implement supply chain data analytics. And currently, I'm the CEO at a company called DL Solutions, which is a technology company specialized in helping manufacturing and distribution companies to digitize their supply chains. I'm also a frequent speaker in supply chain events, including some events here in Canada and also internationally. So thank you very much, John, for having me. And as I said, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm excited to get your perspective, learn also. We're going to share some thoughts. We're going to open a dialogue with John around some topics that we believe that are relevant today. But also, we're looking forward to your feedback, to your comments, to your questions. So because at the end, the power is on the audience, I believe, right?
Very good. Thank you, Hugo. And, just really quick background, over 30 years of ERP. Success Partners is really focused at helping our clients achieve best-in-class results with their ERP system, leveraging best practices. And it's through that and that observation that our customers have a great tool, and as well as prospective clients looking at ERP. I think there's a lot to be said about what needs to be put into place as we improve supply chains at this time. So without further ado, let's get started, Hugo.
Awesome, thank you very much. So I wanted to start first with just quickly going through the agenda for today. So primarily we're going to talk about some of the characteristics or things that we have learned over the last number of months around challenges that supply chains are facing locally, internationally, challenges that come from internal pressures or external pressures that supply chains are facing. Then we're gonna talk a little bit about what companies or people is talking today about resiliency in supply chain. So what is a resilient supply chain? What are the ingredients for a resilient supply chain? A little bit about what we believe is one of the #1 reasons why some companies have struggled and continue to struggle in some areas of managing the supply chain. And we call it here dealing with the #1 killer of a healthy supply chain. We're going to share with you some thoughts around the need for agility, visibility, and better controls that companies are having. And finally, we're going to discuss a little bit about return on investment of any of those for in general, process and systems investments. So I wanted to start with this slide, which I found it very, very interesting because from my perspective, somehow represents what we have been experiencing over the last number of months. And not only over the last number of months, I would say, I think one of the conclusions that I personally have had, discussing with many executives over the last number of months is that I think there's fragility in our supply chain, in our global supply chains that have been around for a long time. And the other thing that has happened over the last number of months is that, maybe the stress test that supply chain have gone through has just only magnified some of our underlying challenges as in organizations. And I think every one of you can think about, and maybe, you know, the challenges that you are experiencing internally in while running your supply chains. That first fragility may come from your relationship with your suppliers, may come from the variability of your demand, may come from your cost, the way how you manage your logistics cost. Whatever those variabilities are, or sources of variability are, I think one of the learnings that we have has been more clear over the last number of months is that there's some things that we need to do differently in order to make sure that we have the strongest links in the supply chain to have that sustainable supply chain in the future in terms of performance and in terms of the standard processes that are going to allow us to create that stronger supply chain. John, I don't know if you want to share some thoughts around this picture first.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that the biggest, you know, analogy that I'm looking at right here is the fact that you can have a really strong components and you're only as good as your weakest link. And even for our clients that are using ERP, you can have the best tool, but if you're using your supply chain and you're purchasing like a typewriter, you're not really advancing the knowledge of MRP and the synchronous demand planning and impact on forecasting that's available to you. So absolutely, I think it's time to, you know, unfortunately in the situation that we're in, we find ourselves highlighting these things, but I think it's a real opportunity to become stronger and leaner and more predictive as people dial in their supply chains. And so a lot can be done to make this just as strong or even stronger than the other components. So I think that's what really this speaks to me on. So
that's awesome. And I think one key message too is that there's no need for necessarily reinventing the wheel. I think one of the things that we have also learned over this period, this challenging periods, is that there's some things that we need to tweak. There's something that really, require a redesign, but it's not something that is out of reach, because most of the ingredients for redesigning the supply chain and things, I think are somehow available. Now, I wanted to share with you. Quickly share with you a few studies. Through this presentation, I'm going to share a couple of studies that I think are interesting, just to open a dialogue and reflect around some things that are happening. The number one that I wanted to share with you is one study that was put together very recently by this global management consulting and executive search firm called Egon Zehnder. So Egon Zehnder run a quick survey that they interviewed around 200 chief supply chain officers or the directors of operations or supply chain people, and so they found some interesting insights that we would like to share with you to understand what's the source of those challenges, or those characteristics of the challenged supply chain that we are seeing. So number one is around external challenges. And here, I'm not presenting here the entire list of external challenges that this survey, came up with, but also I'm just sharing here the top three challenges that executives are, those organizations are presenting as the external challenges that are facing the supply chains today. Number one is cost pressures. So the increasing cost pressures that supply chains are going through nowadays. Number two that I wanted to highlight here is around demand variability. So demand variability. So we have experienced that, right? So over the last number of months. So changes, rapid and sudden changes in demand. Some businesses have increased demand for their products or services dramatically. Other businesses have suffered the opposite. So, but variability seems to be an issue that is somehow increasing over time. And third is customer expectations. So another external pressure from coming from the market in this case is customer expectations, more for less, more, I mean, things faster, things, cheaper, things that are, same day delivery, things that are, additional customer expectations that are putting more and more pressure into our supply chains. Now, from an internal standpoint, and also internal challenges or issues that companies are facing today from a supply chain standpoint, number one is complexity. So as a consequence of those rising expectations from customers, or of those demand variability and cost pressures, the complexity also of our supply chains have increased. So many companies that I talk to, and executives that I talk to, that somehow in the supply chain world, I wouldn't say complain, but they talk about the number of additional products that they need to source and supply today, just because definitely the company has increased the portfolio and the complexity of the portfolio of products over the last number of years. That's additional complexity in the supply chain. Also, the additional, needs for setting distribution centers in different locations. That's additional complexity in your supply chain. The other element that was mentioned here in this study is the talent shortage. So in general, the lack of key people and skills that in some functions particularly are impacting, supply chain performance. And third, I wanted to highlight here also this, this is a more cultural issue. I mean, I think number 3 and number 4 touches, cultural features of any organization, but I think the attitude as business, keep doing business as usual, is something that is also impacting as an internal issue that is challenging supply chain evolutions and transformations nowadays.
Hugo, one of the things that if you don't mind going back just for a second, one of the things that's worth looking at, and I often look at what is holding our customers back from optimizing the use of ERP or business systems. And I would say that, let's not forget that over the last 30 years, we've had a real brain drain in terms of people retiring. In the United States alone, 1,000 people per day are retiring, all of which are leaving with a lot of talent, a lot of experience. And the new era is there's an app for that. There are some basic principles that Apex and Capex, the Canadian version of that Apex organization, has been teaching in best practices, and we just don't see as many people looking at supply chain as important as much. When you look at many companies who think their buyer is their supply chain person, there really is a little bit of a difference, right? And we want to make sure that people, it's not that a buyer cannot become a supply chain person, but you really need to look beyond just, cutting purchase orders and seeing what's required. There's a lot more involved. And so there is a war on talent, and that shortage needs to be perhaps developed from within.
100%. And I think that's, from using some supply chain terms, so there's definitely a demand and supply imbalance from, on a people standpoint, right? That's happening. I've been attending conferences over the last number of years here in Canada and the States and in other places. And this is the topic, most of the hottest topics, in every discussion. How do we attract more people? How do we grow people from internally, but, with the skills that are necessary to operate in this new world? So that's a great comment. In terms of, and this is a question for you, and again, going back to this analogy of the weakest link. So one of the things that I think organizations and we as, supply chain professionals, we need to ask ourselves, you and your companies, so how long does it take you today to identify and act on your weakest link? What is your weakest link today? So I think that's a good question to ask. Some organizations recognize the fact that maybe they don't have a strong supplier base, or they understand that they need to diversify that supplier base to make it more effective and more efficient. Or other people could say, my weakest link is that I'm not really able to capture the demand and forecast demand for, upcoming demand from my customers. And that's driving a lot of, inefficiencies in my supply chain, simply because I don't have a good way to estimate my future demand, my consumption, etc. So various areas for, that potential weakest link. But I think the first and the starting point is question yourself how long, and if you have clarity about what is your weakest link in that supply chain. And back to your point, John, I think it is an interesting point. And here I wanted to share something that comes from Apex, actually, that why supply chain management excellence, or getting better at managing your supply chain, is important. So here are some figures that are shared by Apex in general, and the sources is down there at the bottom. But you can see that what they call best-in-class companies, so companies that utilize practices that are shown over time that deliver incremental value for the organization. So best-in-class companies that utilize those practices, right, in supply chain, so have, sales growth is almost 50% higher than non-best-in-class companies. Similarly with profitability, so they regularly show, better 20% better, higher profitability than non-best-in-class companies. But still, there's an opportunity for, increasing and bringing more of that competitive advantage if the remaining 50% of the companies, and if you look at the bottom there, it says 45% of companies view the supply chain as a strategic asset. So imagine if the over 50% take action and really think that supply chain is an advantage, is a competitive advantage for the organization.
Hugo, the one thing that I often hear from my clients is, what is the payback of leveraging tools and best practices? And so on the surface, one immediately starts to think about the idea that, hey, if I can reduce my inventory, and that is a definite factor. It often is the hard, quick savings, but a good supply chain tool that's used diligently is the gift that keeps on giving. So it's going to continuously help protect your organization in making better decisions and react faster. And, again, it's when we have challenging times as we have today, we start to see the exposure of weakness of not moving quick enough or not seeing the future and not being able to adjust. And I think that in itself, I think there'll be no end to continued changing times, just how dramatic and how well we were prepared to deal with it. And so, yeah, I think this is a very key point that you make here.
That's 100% true. And actually, as a matter of fact, we believe that there's somehow a change in how companies are thinking about their supply chain and the need for incorporating some digital capabilities and skills in their supply chains. So I think before this crisis, I believe still a lot of people thought, it's a nice to have. It's nice to have, some advanced or more advanced supply chain analytic tools like an ERP or, data analytics tools that allow you to leverage on that existing data. But I think now, after what has been going on, I think more and more executives, professionals are thinking, this is a must. Instead of a nice to have, we need to move in that direction. Now, always the question is how. So although I got the desire, I would like to move that direction, sometimes a little bit confusing the how. So hopefully, through this presentation, we're gonna share with the audience a few tips, a few recommendations how to move forward with some of those, this path towards incorporating some of those elements in your supply chain. But I think the message here is, as I said here, this is an article that has also been recently shared that says that 60% of supply chain leaders say that advanced supply chain analytics are the future, are something that is coming in the next 2 to 3 years, and they know that there's a need for investing in those solutions.
What I find interesting here, Hugo, is that there are many many professions and industries that learn from the past. And it's kind of ironic at times that something that was developed in the 1960s and refined into the 70s and 80s in terms of supply chain and continues to be refined to this day, but it's really incremental since its inception, that these proven practices, which really don't cost you anything to exercise, depending on how you exercise them and develop them, really, if I was an engineer, I would wear a ring that reminds me of the past related to failures in engineering. But we don't have anything like that in supply chain. But the reality is it can be just as important. Now, we're not putting life and death at hand, but we're talking about the livelihood of a business, the livelihood of the employees. There's so much we can learn from the past in supply chain, and not using the tools, not using the basic principles is really unfortunate. It's a real blind spot today. So as entrepreneurial companies are growing up, we're seeing more and more of them really saying, hey, I want to scale, I want to grow. But it's no longer a nice to have. We have startup companies that are investing way before their big revenue bubble, and they're doing things faster than some of the companies that have been out there for 25, 30 years who haven't really employed these practices. So I think we are finding that these are some defining moments in our history that we need to learn from. There's a lot of learning, but back to basics, there's some tools and principles that can be employed.
Exactly. And that's connects us with the next point, which is actually this bridge. So I think that through this challenging times, I think more and more companies also have realized that it's not the same running your business that optimizing your business. And the characteristics of a company that is basically running their business today is companies that, for instance, utilize spreadsheets for everything that they do, primarily, right? Or they have their homegrown systems, which is, nothing against that, but simply, it has some level of capabilities that allow you to do some things. But what the business on the market is requiring today is requiring more. So, or companies that today are running their business based in one or multiple ERPs, but they feel like they're not really utilizing that ERP to the highest possible extent and result, and or potentially data is not really utilized effectively, right? And that sets the organization in a more reactive approach. So from a business standpoint, the organization is basically running the today, but not necessarily looking at what is coming in the future. And on the other hand, companies that are really optimizing their business are companies that show some of the features here. So companies that measure, companies that have a disciplined processes, that have access to real-time visibility about their supply chain performance, that are synchronized, that their steps in their process are synchronized. So as an example, so the salesperson in the organization utilizes the same sales forecast and the same number than the operations person, and the operations persons utilize the same number than the finance person. So therefore, when it comes to making decisions in the organization, everyone is talking the same language. So there's no difference between their starting point to make decisions. And that's a huge advantage. And we can talk about best practices like sales and operations planning process and all of that really allows that coordination in the organization. But the synchronization in your business, is so critical that, companies that are optimizing their business are actually utilizing those practices. And that sets the organization in a more proactive approach. So of course, definitely more advanced companies are even getting into the ability to predict what is going to happen, or at least with a higher percentage of success. And but the proactive versus reactive approach, I think that sets a completely different landscape from a business standpoint.
Very true.
Now, back to one of our subjects here is talking a little bit about, supply chain resilience, right? So what are the ingredients for a resilient supply chain? So number one, let's quickly go through this, but just to set the tone regarding what do we understand by supply chain resilience. So, and I took some quotes from some material that I investigated, but just to share with you the concepts behind this. So supply chain resilience is understood as the ability to be prepared for unexpected risks, unexpected events that we were not planning in our business, and also the ability to respond and recover quickly. So if you didn't expect something to come, but you had the ability to respond and recover quickly from that event, that's also part of a resilient organization, a resilient supply chain. And that definitely turns into the flexibility to return to that original situation or grow and move to a new, different, desirable, different state. Now, as an example, so for instance, I mean, based on what we have experienced lately, so if your organization faced a huge increase in demand, so how well or bad prepared is your organization to cope with that increase in demand without impacting dramatically your performance levels in things like production, your service levels, your fill rate to your customers, your delivery of your product on time in full to your customers, or even your suppliers delivering product to you on time in full. So how flexible, how agile, how well prepared is your supply chain to cope with, in this example, a dramatic increase in demand, or the other way around, significant decrease in your demand, and therefore you need to adjust quickly to that event from a capacity standpoint and all of the aspects of your business. And basically what this article mentioned here is that companies can develop somehow resilience in three main ways. Number one, increasing redundancy, something that definitely is not the most maybe efficient approach, but that's still an option. So increasing redundancy in your process. Number two is building flexibility in your processes, and also making some changes to that sometimes corporate culture that is a little bit more rigid, that the corporate culture that you need to be to react and recover more quickly. So, but the important point here is that the first one, as I mentioned before, has limited utility. Therefore, increasing redundancy is, has limited utility. But the other ones, we believe, and this article also believes, that are elements that are essential for building that resilient organization, resilient supply chain. Now, I wanted to also share here in this topic of resilient supply chain. I wanted to share a very recent study that was put together by Deloitte, and you can find the article at the bottom, so you can just continue reading afterwards. But basically, it's it highlights what are the top 5 aspects that companies can accelerate embracing that complexity and building resilience in the supply chain. So one interesting comment that is at the bottom here is that 74% of organizations that Deloitte surveyed for the purpose of this study faced a disruptive event with third parties in the last 3 years. Not only, driven by the recent events, but also, in part of their normal business over the last 3 years. So what are the 5 ways? The 5 ways that in this case, Deloitte recommends as elements to consider for building this more resilient supply chain. Number 1, understand data and employ risk analytics. So somehow think about your existing business, think about your existing links in your supply chain. So how good or bad are you existing? I mean, you are utilizing your existing data to understand your supply chain better. Number 2, manage compliance internally and with your suppliers. So building that strong supplier base, understanding their challenges, their complexities, their priorities, as business partners. That's another element that is highlighted here in this study as critical moving forward for building those more resilient supply chains. Number three, monitor. So monitor and mitigate the risk during the life of a contract with a customer, with a supplier. Number four, the need for continuous assessment of your suppliers. And again, in trying to develop and find that positive relationship with your suppliers, but based on performance. I mean, and that's something that is critical for organizations moving forward. And finally, as usually happens, so the education component. So educating your suppliers and your supply chain professionals, even internally, about the importance of considering not only cost in every decision that you make, but also, of course, the trade-off between cost, service, the trade-off between cost and risk, and some of the things that are critical for building, a more resilient supply chain is trying to find that balance that speaks to the strength of your supplier base, as well as, the cost and the value opportunity that you're bringing from them.
Hugo, this is really nothing new. What gets measured gets managed. But, the reality is that many industries have proven and paved the way to show us that if you are measuring and managing your supply chain, therefore your suppliers, your expectations of what good looks like, trust is really earned. And you can't just assume that last month's lead time and commitment is going to remain the same. It really needs to be something that is a continuous relationship. And I think one of the things that frees up a lot of productivity is using the tools effectively, frees up a lot more time to become not just a chaser and releaser of purchase orders and requirements, but somebody who can actually impact and strengthen those relationships. And in some cases, maybe it's dual sourcing, but there might be different ways to go ahead and execute. But definitely monitoring that risk and understanding that risk is really key if you're going to bet your business on it.
100%. And I think from my perspective and based on my experience working in supply chain for as I said before, around 20 years, supply chain is a game where basically you make trade-offs every day, and it's a trade-off game. So there's always something that you have to consider when you make a decision, and normally it's more than one thing. So you need to find whether the decision that you are making is sometimes your driver is cost. You have to understand that there's a consequence of that decision, and most probably that consequence is going to touch somehow service, or is going to touch risk, or is going to touch your working capital. So there's always a trade-off. And I think managing and making those trade-offs, number one, visible, so you can see that there's some trade-offs that you're making, I think definitely helps the decision maker to make more accurate business decisions. That's what it is at the end, from my perspective. Now, and this is an interesting picture, but one of the things that I think we wanted to share here to the audience is that from our perspective, one of the main reasons why supply chains today face some challenges on a day-to-day basis, and also from a strategic standpoint, but also on the day-to-day decision-making process, is because they're trying to find this needle in the haystack. And that's basically because of, we believe, is because of lack of capabilities to really support that timely, effective decision-making process. I mean, there's experience in organizations. Every organization has a lot of experience that has been built over the years by the people working in that organization. Now, imagine if organizations can take all of that experience and tribal knowledge and great products and great experience running the organization, but boost that decision-making process with the right tools. So that's the great combination that we believe that is going to really empower decision makers, supply chains, and companies now. So, I mean, the lack of capabilities to support the real-time decision-making process, not something that happened last month. And I think that's what makes a real difference. So having access to those real-time insights that allow you to really run your supply chain better and make decisions now, not based on what happened 3 months ago, a year ago, or even a month ago.
You know, Hugo, a lot of observation over my history in the industry has been that when we look at certain results, it's okay to be looking at it, you know, in the rearview mirror, and finance tends to be one of those. But you know, when we talk about pivoting and turning on a dime and mitigating risk for the business, it needs to be more real time. And it isn't acceptable that people are a week late on information gathering. And information needs, in the year 2020, it needs to be front and center, not something that you develop a project to gather the information for, but something that's showing up on the dashboard, presenting itself as you've hit a critical point, it's time for action. No different than a dashboard for driving your car. When the oil light goes on, you need to look into something. Or more importantly, you know, you're running a nuclear reactor and you've got a red flashing light, or an airplane. These are pretty life and death situations. So for your business to just drive past and ignore it, it's going to be a cost exercise immediately. And so without that, you're not actually doing yourself any favors. It's really going to get costly.
Exactly. And the thing that I would like to also share with the audience, just to hopefully try to you know, incentivize, you know, the discussion, the reflection, right, in the organization, is the fact that evolution, this is an evolution. There's no change overnight. So I think if you're an organization that it is at a certain level of maturity in your journey, you got to think about the next step for you. I mean, there's so many people out there talking about really advanced technology that, I mean, it's great sometimes for some companies, right? But people many times get overwhelmed by, you know, things like, oh, you know, you guys have to get into, as an example, I'm just going to use this as an example, right? So you got to get into blockchain, right? Because blockchain is the next thing for, you know, supply chain management. Well, if you are today, and your maturity as an organization today is that you're primarily dealing with spreadsheets, and that's your day-to-day, you know, today. So do you really think that is feasible and it's going to really be a success story for you to think about moving from that level of maturity to adoption of blockchain technology? Well, I mean, I'm not saying that it's not possible. What I'm saying is that it increases your failure rate to think about adopting something that is well beyond your existing capabilities. So that's the reason why I believe, and this is my belief, when people talk about this digital transformation, you know, term, I'm pretty much in favor of digitalization of companies and bringing more tools. But the thing is a matter of digital evolution. And I prefer personally to use the term digital evolution, the digital transformation. So it's step-by-step thing. And that's, I think, give us, you know, an introduction for the next slide, which is basically understanding that this is a journey. This is something that goes step by step, and every company has to recognize first where I am today. What is my place today as a company? I'm a startup company. I'm a company that is you know, scaling operations, or am I a company who is more mature in that journey, and I already went through a startup and I went through scale, and now I'm maturing as an organization. So we would like to share some thoughts around this, and please, John, you know, join me with in this slide just to share some thoughts with the audience. But in general, I mean, I think, as I said before, understanding the journey of a business is critical for understanding what is the right technology for you, a solution or for you to adopt at different stages in that maturity journey. So we're going to highlight here some of the aspects of a startup, scale, and mature organization from a business, processes, and systems and data standpoint. So from a startup, standpoint, think about a business that is starting, has been around for a few years. So you have a great idea, maybe you have already a great product that you're selling in the market, and you see, and your organization see, and your executives and everyone sees a lot of growth potential. So most probably you're going to have processes today that are not necessarily that structured, but they provide you with flexibility, adaptability, so you can basically adapt to different conditions very quickly, very flexible processes, as a very fluid operation in general. Now, from a systems and data standpoint, most probably a startup company is gonna be in this stage. So with primarily focusing on getting accounting right, so getting your numbers, your financials in the right place. So most probably from an operational standpoint, you're gonna leverage, you're gonna use primarily spreadsheets, and your systems and data architecture is gonna be probably more unstructured. So it's not gonna really necessarily be really structured, and maybe because the business is not needing that today, or because your priority as an organization is primarily growth. How do we support growth, but not necessarily trying to structure the business at this stage yet. Second step in this maturity journey, as I mentioned before, from startup. Now your startup company, you went through that step in the process, and now you're scaling the business. Now, when you're scaling the business, normally from a business standpoint, the challenges that you face or your priorities are how do I grow? Sustainable growth. We start as an organization planning, our future growth, or our operation planning, or resources planning, and we need to really fight complexity. So making sure that we are able as an organization to manage complexity from all the different angles. So from a supply chain standpoint, from a finance standpoint, sales, marketing, etc. So that's normally what companies or businesses face at that scale step. From a process standpoint, consistency, consistent processes, measurable processes, and efficient processes. So, and those are sort of the challenges or priorities when you're sitting in that level of maturity as a company in the scale phase. And from a systems standpoint and data standpoint, normally you continue to focus on accounting and finance principles, but now you also bring the operational focus to the table, just to make sure that you have all the processes. Hopefully you start adopting some best practices to make sure that your scalability as a company is sustainable, and the need for structure, the need for really bringing a structure into your organization to make sure that there's consistency and their processes are measured, and efficiency starts getting better and better. And finally, from a maturity standpoint, the next step in that maturity journey is companies that are more mature, companies that really want to get into that performance-oriented approach, that have companies that have controls in place, and that would like to have predictable outcomes in their business. So therefore, when you talk to the shareholders of the company or internal stakeholders of the company, there's a way that you can really manage your business, providing predictable outcomes out of your work. So therefore, from a process standpoint, you think about standard processes. So the ability to really scale and repeat your process constantly, permanently. And from a system standpoint, there's a need for that end-to-end integration in your processes. So that what we call this closed loop planning. And also, data becomes more trusted and is a valuable asset for the organization. So this is the journey that, from our perspective, most of companies go through when they run their business from startup up to a more mature organization. John, anything to add to this?
Yeah, I would really say that my experience has been that as soon as you need to rely on others, be that you have a larger payroll, you've got a lot of people and families you're feeding as a result of your business model, you're going outside for money, which might be as simple as the bank. I mean, they're going to hold you accountable to showing numbers effectively. really data and the measurement of your business becomes more and more important.
100%. And that's where, you know, and this is the purpose of bringing this to the table, is also to try to share some thoughts and shed some light on where then ERPs and data analytics come into the equation, depending on the level of maturity that you are as an organization. So we believe that for companies transitioning from startup mode into a more scalable, that they want to transition from that mode into a more scalable business, so they need an ERP. And the ERP normally is the solution for a company trying to really get more consistent, more measurable, more efficient, and have that operational focus. Now, for companies that are already in that phase, so actually they already are operating with one ERP or multiple ERPs, and they want to really scale the business now from that to that higher level of accountability internally, and they have, you know, additional things to, you know, take care of, like, you know, performance controls, predictable outcomes that we mentioned before. So companies that have the data available, but they need something to really, you know, extract value out of that data, is when analytics help to move the organization from that stage to the next step in the process. And at the end of the day, as you rightly mentioned before, so moving from the startup mode up to, you know, that mature mode, from a shareholder and a stakeholder standpoint, is basically adding incremental value, depending on, I guess, the as I mentioned before, the business requirements and what are you looking for as an organization.
There's no doubt that moving from an entrepreneurial business where it's all in your head and it's blood, sweat, and tears, to a more formal business that can run without you represents value. And when we look at businesses that today are moving through generations, and, you know, it might be a private equity involvement, the real value, and even banking organizations will promote that the company put an ERP in place, because it really gets a lot of that information out of their heads and into systems. And with systems, you can bet on the information, because a consistent process will provide a consistent insight through data. And I think that's where companies have actually realized that their business is actually exponentially worth more money, because it's not about one individual or a couple individuals. It's about having a well-oiled machine that can consistently perform.
That's 100% true. And that's why, that's give me, you know, a good intro for this next slide, which is, you know, for people that is thinking, okay, but how the ERP and the analytics come to the equation here, how those tools, those, you know, solutions help the organization to move forward from one stage to the other. And here's the nice thing about, you know, the partnership that we're developing between, you know, Epicor 6S partners and DL Solutions, is the fact that if you think about this diagram, so if you're a company that currently has Epicore as a solution, so your ERP, Epicor ERP, is at the core of your existing operation. So you have processes, you have data structure in place. You have the good thing about this is that you have your, you know, data source consistency there, standard processes. That's what, you know, most of the value of a strong ERP like Epicore brings to the table. So the OWL helps leveraging all of that data that, in this case, Epicore has accumulated, or the company has accumulated in the ERP, and to add intelligence to that, what we call data intelligence, to that information, and provide with pre-configured supply chain analytics that allow companies to continue in the evolution of this journey from you know, that's this digital evolution, this digital journey in any organization. Examples of typical, you know, end-to-end supply chain analytics that companies start looking at when they reach that maturity level, things like this. So you would like to understand the behavior of your customers. So let's say your forecasting performance, your sales trends, the accuracy and bias of your sales forecast. You would like to understand, organizations like to understand, the customer service levels and monitor that frequently. So are you as an organization serving your customers to the level that they expect from you? So customers, products, performance, etc. So from an internal standpoint, do you have the ability to measure permanently your warehouse and distribution costs? So what is your existing logistics cost to serve today? So how much are you as an organization spending in warehousing, in distribution, in inbound and outbound transportation? Questions that organizations need to monitor, frequently in order to make progress in their supply chains. As well as inventory levels, as another example. So what is the performance of your inventory, not only at a very high level financial number, but down to the each individual product or material or work in progress. So what is your inventory performance? What is your, how much money you have in your inventory, real time? So from a plant perspective or manufacturing facility perspective, so what is your manufacturing performance, your MPS performance? So production cycle times, scrap rates, the schedule attainment or adherence in your process. And finally, from a supplier standpoint, you would like to also measure and monitor the performance of your suppliers through spend analytics, supplier reliability, sourcing diversification, etc. Any comment about this, John?
No, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that ERP lays down the foundation for all of this information to be measured, but many are, maybe not focused on actually extracting that information. And, it admittedly, there's some involvement with processes to get it right. But at the end of the day, this is all readily available for most firms.
And that's very true. I mean, and that's one of the key messages too that I would like to pass to you, that if you're currently an Epicore customer, you very likely you have all the ingredients, all the data in your system today to come up with analytics to monitor your end-to-end supply chain. But the thing is that you need to understand, of course, and that's where an area where we can help. So where that data resides, how to transform that data into the analytics that you need to run your supply chain. And therefore, that's the reason why, as part of this engagement and discussion with our partnership with 6S Partners, we are offering a proof of concept to any customer of 6S Partners that is interested to see with their own data, with a sample of their own data, how those analytics can leverage the information that companies have already accumulated in Epicore for some time. So this is a proof of concept that it requires minimal IT involvement, and that basically helps organizations to understand and see what is the advantage of having solutions like this in place.
If I could just add, we have clients in many different industries, and so, you might not get a forecast from your customers, but you can develop forecasts. If you're a project-based company, you can develop forecasts around service parts, maintenance. You can also tighten up your supply chain relationships, even if you are buying to the project, because again, it's a synchronous flow. As things speed up, slow down, you need to continue to stay on top of that supply and demand. So this really will work with many industries.
Exactly. Finally, I don't know if you want to share this one, John?
Yeah. And just as we do, I think something worth saying is, aside from just coming up with a product that is reporting based, what I like about the OWL and the relationship of, the Epicor best practices, the best practices in supply chain that come from the OWL, it also comes with a coaching capability. So not only is it a reporting tool that, someone would expect someone on the other end to have the the background to interpret, there is an offering to allow you to build the staff skills up so that they can actually really understand and interpret the data. And part of that coaching can be an ongoing relationship where once a month, a few hours are spent working together to make sure that you're truly getting the most out of the tools. But, now that you get down to this point on a call to action, Epicore has long been qualifying for government funds around training and advancing the capabilities of your business. And if you're a Canadian manufacturer or US manufacturer, there are programs out there. But as of April, the CME, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, have come up with a technology assessment program. And this assessment offers $25,000 of free assessment to help you justify a project. That project might be to venture into your first ERP if you're not using an ERP at this point, and build a case for change and understand the impact areas and how it would improve your competitiveness and your ability to grow profitably. The Canadian government has a vested interest in that. But conversely, this assessment can also be used, maybe it doesn't require 25K, but it is a full 100% funded assessment that can also be used to improve your ability to execute your ERP. So data analytics is a great example of that. So depending where you are on the scale, this available money, which is going to go through to the end of the year, offers an opportunity for you to apply, and we'll be happy to help walk you through that, for an assessment that is paid for on the basis that you're really trying to improve your business, which will improve your profitability and will create a return on investment. So it's a real win-win that the Canadian government has come up with and partnering with the CME.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's a great opportunity, and connected with the previous slide. So this proof of concept is also a really good way for companies to really see what is possible. And I think that's the advantage. Finally, we're just basically reaching the hour. So as a summary, I think we believe that there's never been a better time to invest in your supply chain. We definitely recognize that the last months has been challenging from every single business standpoint, and so some companies are definitely reluctant to invest or move forward. But we believe that this is exactly the opposite. This is the great opportunity for companies to invest, and because there's payback. There's payback behind that is going to result in you running your supply chain better, and also adding that, building that more resilient supply chain moving forward. And the other thing is that the other trend that we see in the market is more and more companies investing in cloud-based solutions that require, instead of investing CapEx in your organization, towards more now investing in operational expenses, OpEx, which definitely facilitates also the process of getting some of those more advanced analytic tools on board. Any additional comment there, John?
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that what the offering here is a bit of a flexible offering. So, on one hand, the OWL tool is a cloud-based tool that will capture your data in a secure manner and provide you the metrics to run your business, offers additional coaching that can add value, but that there's also another in-between solution, and that is, maybe you just need some customized reports to further tailor your requirements and really focus your business. There are a number of ways to go about this. So, does it all have to be on premise? Does it all have to be in the cloud? I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer, but I think at the end here, we'll go through a few questions. There's a little Q&A here that we want to address, but ultimately, we're really interested in seeing our clients take advantage of the tools they have, and what they, as you have an ERP, or as your journey to get an ERP and move forward, there's different steps in the journey that help you optimize, and dialing in your business to leverage this information for strong decision support is probably the reason people move forward with an ERP to begin with. And I think there's a great opportunity here. And for a fraction of the cost, I mean, many systems, many BI or business intelligence systems require an IT project. This is really, think of this as a expert ready capability to come in and deliver consulting with existing metrics that are accepted in the industry, tailored to what you're trying to accomplish as a business. So we recognize ETO, engineer to order versus make to stock, project versus, making to forecast. There's lots of different environments out there, and that it's usually a mixed mode. And the mix is really up to your business.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time. If there's still some time for questions, we're happy to answer. But yeah, we would love to stay in touch and definitely answer some of your
questions. What we'll do at the end of this, Hugo, is we'll send everybody a link to the recording and a way to reach out to us if there's further questions or discussions. There is a no-cost pilot, so if anyone's interested in looking at this for their business, there is a way to trial run this. And if you're serious about that, we are very serious in helping you. There are a couple questions here. So there was one question here. In your opinions, what are the key aspects and features in Epicore that allow companies to identify the weak links in their supply chain? I know, Hugo, you're going to answer this. I'm going to start to say at the very beginning, it's definitely looking at true lead times. So being able to measure and measure performance on a vendor to see if they're actually hitting the lead times that they've promised. Part of that is going to be keeping your data clean and up to date. But you have a number of risk adjustment type insights, do you not, Hugo?
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, you mentioned one. I think measuring the actual demonstrated lead time from your suppliers is an area where a lot of companies struggle, and they simply struggle because they have, let's say, when they install, an ERP, the first time they install the ERP, they configure it with a certain theoretical lead times that were based on the contract that you have with your supplier. But the question is, how consistent over time is that lead time? And the only way to measure that is to utilize your own data and utilize your data to tell you the answer. And then from there, you're going to be able to make decisions around, do I need to adjust the lead time in my system? Therefore, now the planning bench is going to operate more efficiently and more effectively, and it's going to really reflect what's going on in the market. Or I need to sit with my supplier and adjust and have a discussion around why the performance of that lead time or attainment of that lead time is not that good. That's a great example, but it's only one of the examples that we can help companies and bring to the table to help companies to leverage their existing data to improve the way that they utilize their ERP, as an example. And back to one of your points, I mean, there's a lot of people also that has some concerns regarding the data quality, the quality of their existing data. My invite here and my recommendation always is, this is a chicken and egg question. So why is that? Because if you think that your data, the quality of your data is not good, right, or perfect or whatever, it will never be perfect, by the way, but it's not good. The only way to correct that, number one, is to visualize the problems that you have in your data. Then once you visualize the problems that you have in your data in detail, now you can go back and tweak the process that is generating the data in a wrongly way, or provide a new procedure to with your people. And that's an area we can also help. So we can help not only to visualize the data in a more effective way, but also to help you with the best practices to modify the processes that produce that data that necessarily is not providing you the value that you expect.
The big point here is, do we hire a supply chain expert, or do we grow it with the existing expertise and knowledge within our business? And I think the answer is what's right for your business. But the reality is that you have the ingredients. Why not just turn the dial a notch or two and help you put in place some best practice processes that help you leverage the technology? It's really what we call managing through people, process, and technology, and not really putting the technology first It's about the right balance for your business, and it's going to yield the results. Somebody asked a question around how does Epicor, or sorry, how does the features of the OWL compare to Epicor data discovery? So Epicore has a tool in a very similar fashion. You know, nothing against it. I guess the difference here is that there's a really, instead of an intrinsic data value, there's actually an action plan to put in place the consulting and the services and the product that is going to be tailored to your needs, and so that you can run your business as opposed to some generic templates. This is actually helping you put in practice all of the elements that make sure that those metrics are going to be managed effectively. And that means coaching, it means understanding how to gain insights and how to develop kind of a war room and expertise around your business and the indicators that might be hidden today, really exposing that hidden data. Great. I think we're at the end of the presentation, and we will send this out as a link for everyone. We do appreciate your time. Thank you everyone who stuck it out. And if you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to Success Partners, 1-866-579-6S. We will send out, as I said, a contact information as part of our follow-up, and just really do appreciate everyone attending. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you, Hugo.
No, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.